Shabbat Shalom. There we go. Wonderful to be here this Shabbat. We have a very unique Torah portion, introduces a very interesting sequence of Torah portions. And the name of this week's Torah portion, the double Torah portion, is Bahar. And this double part of it, which we're not going to read today, is Bechukotai. And then next week, we're going to read from the book of Bamidbar. But sets in place this really unique sequence that has a very powerful message for us. Bahar is mountain. Bechukotai are in the laws, the rules. And then Bamidbar is in the wilderness. So what we find is, between the mountain and the wilderness are the laws. And there's a message there about the choice of where Torah is received. And there's also a message there about the purpose and what's at stake for the continued expression of revelation or Torah. Because Torah is not given in a garden. It's not given in a place where all of the rules are clear, where we can understand. We have not rules, but everything is taken care of. Everything's in perfect order. Because when we have everything taken care of, there's no need for something to give us direction and purpose, because the garden provides for everything. But at the mountain, having just left Egypt, we are in need of all of those things that Torah provides us: direction, purpose, a sense of identity. That's the mountain. And alas, if only once we did one of the commandments, it just maintained its value and affirmed the order of the world. But alas, that's not how the world works. So we receive the Torah, and then we go into the wilderness. We go into the Midbar. And what we're tasked with is trying to do our best to maintain the order that we're trying to build, which doesn't come naturally. We work uphill. But the reward is we can live with purpose and meaning in the wilderness. So it's with this understanding that I introduced to you the topic of the set of laws that we get in this week's Torah portion, which is the Jubilee year. And the Jubilee year is brought forward with the sound of a shofar. You look at page 739, verse 9. Va'avarta shofar tzura b'chodesh hashvi'i ba'asur lachodesh b'yom ha'kippurim ta'viru shofar b'chol artzechem. Then you shall sound the horn loud in the 7th month, on the 10th day of the month, the day of atonement. So what was one of the original purposes of Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement? It was a time to announce the Jubilee year. Now, what's going on here? To get a sense of this time of year, we can look to our Siddur, our prayer book, which I left over here. A colleague of mine, Rabbi Eli Confer, brings to our attention a very interesting blessing that comes in the weekday Amidah. And it reads as follows. This is, by the way, if you're in a prayer circle in a Jewish synagogue, this is during often the silent part of the Amidah. And oftentimes people read the Hebrew words, but I don't know if we really understand what the meaning is. So here's one of those things that takes place during that silent moment. Tik'ah b'shofar gadol lecherutenu. Bless the great shofar, lecherutenu. V'sa nes lekabetz galiotenu, v'kabsenu yachad me'arba kanfot ha'aretz. Okay? Raise the banner signaling the ingathering of our exiles and bring us together from the four corners of the earth. So what is this blessing describing? What is this blessing describing? The shofar is to be blown and what? We're to come together, the ingathering of the exiles, and a shofar is blown for cherutenu. Before we unpack what cherutenu is, where is this ingathering of the exiles supposed to be taking place? Israel. Yeah, 100%. Embedded in the Amidah is this blessing for Israel. And what is the blessing for Israel? That it's a place for us to come together. By the way, the idea of exiles comes from Isaiah, and it's pretty sad because when you read the verse of where the idea that Israel is to be a place where we gather together, it has more to do with the ingathering of exiles from the Assyrian Empire. So Isaiah is not talking about the Judeans who live in Babylon, but it's about the 10 tribes that were conquered by the Assyrians, and they were dispersed. And what's really sad is that we know what happens to these 10 tribes, which is they're all lost. None of us know of the future of these 10 tribes. And yet, embedded in this blessing is an aspirational idea that somehow these lost tribes are going to find a way to come together. But let's look at this, the first part. Announce our freedom with this shofar. What do you think this means, that our freedom is to be announced? What is meant by freedom? Diana.
I think so much of what we experience in Judaism is a duality. And we just actually had the experience of me'avdut l'cherut at Pesach, so that was one thing. And then I remembered your lovely drash on cherut being an acronym for the four sons.
Yeah.
Which I thought was fabulous as well. And so I think it's this whole idea of freedom of, I guess I would almost say like freedom of religion in a way. But it's not like freedom to go and do whatever you want. It's not freedom to go and break these laws that were being given. It's the freedom to practice Judaism and to do the mitzvot and to be a Jewish nation.
100%. So cherut really loses its power when we describe it simply as being freedom. Because freedom is to do whatever we want. It allows us to be guided by our own personal desires about what we want to do. Cherut calls upon us for a higher purpose. Thank you for recalling that drasha about the four sons. But the idea was, the goal of cherut is to bring people together from diverse perspectives. That's the work of cherut. Cherut challenges the question: freedom for what? You left Egypt to do what? Okay, that is what cherut is. By the way, my colleague Rabbi Eli Koffer points out that cherut is not used in the Bible. It's a post-biblical word. And it's first used as part of onklos, the Aramaic translation of the word of jubilee, which is understood to be dror. And if you see here the word on the next verse, v'kidashtem et shnat hamshim shana v'karatem dror ba'aretz, right? You shall proclaim. The English here says release, and onklos says cheruta. So the cherut that is being called upon here is that it's a time of jubilee. So it could be that we have understand cherut as freedom with purpose. Question is, what is that purpose? And the translation is now telling us It's a freedom to do Jubilee. That's what this is all about. You can now do Jubilee. So what is so great about this Jubilee year that it serves the central purpose of helping us to understand Revelation? Diana, you're going to say something?
I was going to say, like, I think one of the really important parts of this prayer is the suffix, leferute nu, that it's ours. And when we talk, and the prayers I think that are in the first person plural are just so powerful because we're saying it's about us. And I think that's
Oh.
amazing.
Yes. Well, and by the way, that is also the frame of most of the Jewish prayers, right? That we say in our Amidah was that it's an emphasis on community. There's always a new at the end of it, 100%. Although, I want to just go back to that question of what type of cherut are we talking? What does it mean that the goal here is to highlight we're free to have a Jubilee year? What do we know about the Jubilee year? What happens on the Jubilee year that is so significant for the land of Israel? Say again?
You leave it alone.
What does it mean? Yeah, tell me about what is the social impact of when we leave the land alone?
Well, it's first of all, you're giving people a little bit of a break from all the hard work. There's a little bit of favor there. You're freeing the slaves at this point as well. So
Correct.
a little bit of a labor force issue, and that coincides with letting the ground. I don't know that much about agriculture, I'm afraid, but I know that it's important for the land to get all the nutrients and to sort of let it rest
Yeah.
so that it
Yeah.
can become like stronger
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
to fallow.
Yeah.
And during that time, you can still eat what it produces, but you're not working.
Right. We are free to free our slaves. We are free to release the land, let go of our control over it. And that is the central piece of Jubilee. So what does it mean? Why is it so important to free our slaves? Every 7 years, we are to release our slaves. But you could choose, if you're a slave and you're enjoying the work of being a slave, you could choose at that time to continue your slavery. You get an earring. The original purpose of getting an earring is to remind you that you could have been free and you chose not. And at that seventh year, if you choose to remain slaves, you are known as an Eved Olam. You're known as being an eternal slave, a slave forever, up until the Jubilee year when you have to stop. And that sets up a very interesting idea, that the Jubilee year marks a time when those who are slaves for perpetuity must stop. And it upholds this idea in Judaism of social equity, that we're all made in God's image, and that no one should be subjected to the power of others without any type of rights or balance. And the other piece is we release the land. The land goes back to its original format. One of the original sources of power is we try to control real estate and land. And the Jubilee year says, no. We're going back to the original owner, which ultimately is God, bringing us back to that Garden of Eden. So what's going on here in this parasha of Bahar? Bahar is our first call to understanding what it means to have Torah in our lives. And the law that comes forward is the Jubilee year. This Jubilee year is designed to uphold that we are all made in God's image, and that the land is ultimately a gift by God to the people of Israel. Now, it's difficult to grasp onto those ideas because what does it mean for everyone to be equal? What does it mean to let go of the land and give it back to God? It's difficult for us to do. And I don't know if the purpose of the Torah here is to be so concrete as to say this is exactly what's going to happen in the 50th year. There's not a lot of great texts that show, by the way, that once we inhabited the land that we actually kept the Jubilee year. So what then is the purpose of the Jubilee year, and why is it so central to the revelation of the Torah? I think the goal is for it to be aspirational. It's a goal, it's there to encourage us to see where we should be striving to go towards. And even though we might not make it through this wilderness perfectly, even though we might not make it to the top of the mountain, we still have direction, a pathway to move forward. It's placed in the Amidah right after all these prayers that are affirmations. God, you are the God who lifts us up when we've fallen. You heal us. You have the power to forgive us. And then comes this tik'ah b'shofar. And the Amidah says, you know what? There's a place for dreaming. There's a place for striving to live for a better tomorrow. One of the aspects of prayer is not just to express gratitude, but it's to encourage us to dream about what we can be, even if that horizon is beyond our reach. That's the purpose of this blessing, and I think that is the most redeeming value of the idea of the Jubilee year. Shabbat Shalom.